The dawn sun painted the horizon in hues of amber and crimson, as Adelaide Taylor stood at the edge of Terlingua, Texas, her trembling fingers clutching the tattered letter that had brought her to this desolate corner of the frontier in 1876. The journey from Boston had been long, dusty, and filled with whispers of danger, but nothing could have prepared her for the emptiness that stretched before her now. Adelaide adjusted her travel-worn bonnet and smoothed down her once fine blue dress, now dulled by the relentless desert dust. 22 years old and utterly alone, she had gambled everything on the promise of a teaching position at the newly established schoolhouse. The stagecoach driver had eyed her curiously when she'd mentioned her destination, his weathered face betraying a mixture of amusement and concern. "Terlingua ain't no place for a lady like yourself," he'd warned, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "Mining town full of rough men and rougher ways." But Adelaide had smiled with practiced confidence, tucking away her fears behind a mask of determination. After her father's death and the subsequent loss of their Boston home to creditors, she had few options left. The teaching position offered room, board, and enough salary to eventually rebuild her life. The dusty Main Street before her looked nothing like the thriving community described in the letter. Weathered buildings sagged beneath the weight of the harsh Texas sun, while men in dirt-caked clothes moved between the saloon and the mercantile with grim purpose. A small girl chased a chicken across the street, her bare feet kicking up clouds of dust. Adelaide clutched her carpetbag tighter as a group of miners gave her appraising glances. "You must be the new schoolmarm," a voice called out, startling her from her observations. Adelaide turned to find a man approaching on horseback, his features obscured by the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat. As he drew closer, she could make out a strong jawline peppered with stubble and eyes the color of a summer storm. He dismounted with easy grace, his movements fluid despite his tall frame. "I am Adelaide Taylor, yes," she replied, extending her hand with as much dignity as she could muster. "And you are Forrest Winters," he answered, removing his hat to reveal sun-streaked brown hair. He accepted her outstretched hand with a gentle but calloused grip. "Town Marshal, Mayor asked me to escort you to your lodgings." Adelaide studied him carefully. Unlike the other men she'd seen since arriving, Marshal Winters wore a clean shirt beneath his leather vest, though his denim trousers and boots bore the unmistakable signs of hard living. A badge gleamed on his chest, and a revolver sat holstered at his hip. "I appreciate your assistance, Marshal," she said, retrieving her hand from his. "I confess this is quite different from what I expected." A hint of a smile curved his lips. "I reckon it is at that, Miss Taylor. Terlingua's got more grit than polish, but there's good folk here." He reached for her carpetbag. "May I?" Adelaide relinquished her luggage and followed as he led his horse down the street, matching his pace to hers. She could feel the curious stares of the townspeople as they passed. "The schoolhouse isn't quite finished yet," Forrest explained, his voice low and measured. "Town council's been working on it for months, but supplies are slow coming from El Paso." Adelaide's heart sank, but the letter stated it would be ready by my arrival. "Mayor Jenkins tends to be optimistic in his correspondence," Forrest replied diplomatically. "We've arranged for you to stay with Mrs. Holbrook in the meantime. She's the widow of our former mine supervisor, has a nice house on the edge of town." They approached a whitewashed two-story building that stood apart from the ramshackle structures of the main street. A woman with silver-streaked hair stood on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "This here's Miss Taylor," Forrest called out as they approached. "Mrs." Holbrook's weathered face brightened. "Well, ain't you a sight? Come in, come in. You must be exhausted after your journey." She ushered Adelaide up the steps with maternal enthusiasm. "I've got stew simmering and fresh bread cooling." Adelaide turned to thank the marshal, but he had already retreated a few steps, hat back on his head. "I'll come by tomorrow to show you the schoolhouse site," he said, mounting his horse with practiced ease. "Rest well, Miss Taylor." As he rode away, Adelaide couldn't help but notice the straight line of his back and the confident set of his shoulders. Despite her exhaustion and disappointment, she found herself curious about the laconic lawman and the rough-hewn town he protected. The next morning brought clarity and renewed purpose. After a hearty breakfast and Mrs. Holbrook's detailed account of local gossip, Adelaide felt better prepared to face Terlingua's challenges. She dressed in her most practical skirt and blouse, pinned her honey blonde hair into a sensible knot, and waited for Marshal Winters on the porch. He arrived precisely when he promised, this time on foot. In the clear morning light, she could better appreciate his features, the straight nose, strong brow, and the subtle lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more than she'd witnessed. "Morning, Miss Taylor," he greeted, touching the brim of his hat. "Ready to see your future kingdom?" "Quite ready, Marshal," she replied, falling into step beside him. "Though I hope you've brought good news regarding its completion." "It's Forrest," he said, surprising her. "Just Forrest is fine unless you prefer the formality." Adelaide considered this. In Boston, such familiarity would be inappropriate, but Terlingua clearly operated by different social codes. "Then you must call me Adelaide," she offered in return. He nodded once, and they continued in companionable silence until they reached the outskirts of town. A half-constructed wooden building stood alone against the backdrop of distant mountains. Several men worked on the roof, while others fitted windows into the front wall. "It's smaller than I expected," Adelaide remarked, taking in the humble structure. 27 children in Terlingua and the surrounding ranches, Forrest explained. "Not counting the Mexican families at the South Mine, though they're welcome if they choose to come." Adelaide raised an eyebrow. "All children deserve education, regardless of heritage." Something in Forrest's expression softened. "Agree with you there. Not everyone does, but the school board approved opening enrollment to all." He gestured toward the building. "Should be finished within 3 weeks if the lumber shipment arrives on schedule." Adelaide walked around the structure, envisioning her future classroom. Despite its modest size, the building featured tall windows to capture the desert light and a small bell tower that would eventually call her students to lessons. "What brings a Boston lady to Terlingua?" Forrest asked as she completed her circuit. "Must have had finer offers than this dust patch." Adelaide hesitated, unwilling to reveal the desperate circumstances that had driven her west. "I sought adventure," she said instead, "and the opportunity to build something meaningful." Forrest's eyes gray with flecks of blue, she now noticed studied her with quiet intensity. "Well, there's plenty of building to be done here," he finally said, glancing at the schoolhouse. "Though adventure isn't always what storybooks make it out to be." Over the following days, Adelaide established a routine. Mornings were spent assisting Mrs. Holbrook with household tasks, afternoons visiting potential students' families, and evenings preparing lessons. Forrest appeared regularly, ostensibly to update her on the schoolhouse progress, though his visits often extended to discussions about the town's history, the challenges of frontier justice, and occasionally, literature. "You read Emerson?" Adelaide asked incredulously one evening as they sat on Mrs. Holbrook's porch, the setting sun painting the desert in gold. Forrest chuckled, a rare sound that Adelaide had come to treasure. 4 years at a Pennsylvania college before the war changed my plans," he admitted. "My father wanted me to be a lawyer." "The war changed many things," Adelaide said softly, thinking of her own father whose health had never recovered from his Civil War injuries. "That it did," Forrest agreed, his expression distant. After a moment he stood, adjusting his gun belt. "Town council meeting tomorrow. I'll walk you to the schoolhouse after they've just about finished the interior walls." As the days stretched into weeks, Adelaide found herself looking forward to these encounters more than she cared to admit. Forrest Winters presented a contradiction, a scholarly mind behind a lawman's weathered exterior, gentleness beneath necessary toughness. She caught herself watching him when he wasn't looking, noting the grace of his movements and the quiet authority he commanded without raising his voice. The schoolhouse was completed in late October, just as the desert heat began to soften. The town organized a small celebration to mark the occasion, with families bringing food to share in the new building. Adelaide wore her best dress, a forest green creation that Mrs. Holbrook had helped modify to the current fashion, and arranged her classroom with meticulous care. As the festivities wound down and families departed with sleepy children, Adelaide found herself alone with Forrest, who had volunteered to help clean up. "You've done wonders here," he said, gesturing to the neatly arranged desks, the carefully lettered alphabet above the chalkboard, and the small library she had started with books donated from back east. "Thank you," Adelaide replied, warmth spreading through her chest at his approval. "Though I confess I'm nervous about Monday. What if they don't respect me? What if I can't control them?" Forrest stacked the last of the plates from the celebration. "You commanded the attention of every miner, rancher, and shopkeeper today without raising your voice once," he observed. "The children will be putty in your hands," Adelaide laughed. "I doubt that very much." She reached for her shawl, suddenly aware of the cooling evening air and their solitude. "Will you walk me home? Mrs. Holbrook will worry." Under the vast canopy of stars, Adelaide felt a shift in their companionship. Forrest walked closer than usual, his arm occasionally brushing hers, each contact sending a flutter through her stomach that had nothing to do with nervousness about her impending teaching duties. "I've been meaning to ask," he said as they approached Mrs. Holbrook's house. "There's a harvest dance next Saturday at the Rocking H Ranch. Would you consider attending with me?" Adelaide stopped walking, surprised by the formal invitation after weeks of casual interactions. "As your escort." Even in the dim light, she could see color rise in his face. "As my guest," he clarified, "though I'd be honored to be considered your escort." Adelaide's heart quickened. "I would like that very much, Forrest." His smile, rare, genuine, and transformative, lit his features. "I'll come for you at 6 then." He tipped his hat and waited until she was safely inside before departing. Mrs. Holbrook took one look at Adelaide's flushed face and knowing smile before clapping her hands together. "Well now, it seems our Marshal has finally found the courage to speak his mind." "It's just a dance," Adelaide protested weakly. "Forrest Winters hasn't escorted a woman anywhere since he came to Terlingua 4 years ago," Mrs. Holbrook countered. "That man walks straighter when you're in his sights. Mark my words." The week passed in a blur of first lessons and getting to know her students. The children, ranging from 6 to 16, proved eager to learn if somewhat untamed in their enthusiasm. By Friday, Adelaide had established clear routines and expectations, earning both respect and affection from her young charges. Saturday evening found her fussing with her hair, attempting an elaborate style she remembered from Boston society parties. "Here, let me, Mrs. Holbrook offered, taking the brush. "Simple is better for a ranch dance. You'll be swirling around too much for those fancy city curls to hold." When Forrest arrived, Adelaide descended the stairs in a deep blue dress with delicate lace trim. She'd allowed Mrs. Holbrook to style her hair in a becoming arrangement of soft waves pinned at the sides, with a few tendrils framing her face. Forrest stood in the parlor, hat in hand, wearing a clean black coat over a white shirt. He'd trimmed his stubble and slicked back his hair, and for a moment, Adelaide could glimpse the college man he might have become had the war not intervened. "You look beautiful," he said simply, his directness more affecting than flowery compliments. "And you are quite handsome yourself, Marshal," she returned, pleased to see his eyes brighten at her words. The rocking H Ranch lay several miles outside town, its main house transformed for the celebration with lanterns strung across the yard and tables laden with food. A small band played lively tunes as couples danced on a wooden platform constructed for the occasion. Adelaide knew few of the ranch families, and Forrest kept close to her side, introducing her proudly as our schoolteacher to everyone they encountered. After sharing a plate of barbecue and cornbread, he extended his hand. "May I have this dance?" Adelaide had danced at countless Boston socials, but never had a simple quadrille felt so intimate. Forrest moved with surprising grace for a man his size, guiding her through the steps with gentle pressure at her waist. When the music slowed to a waltz, he drew her closer, his hand warm and steady against her back. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice low enough for only her to hear, "that Terlingua is lucky you chose us." Adelaide looked up at him, suddenly breathless from more than just the dancing. "And I'm beginning to think I'm fortunate Terlingua chose me." The evening passed in a whirl of dances, conversations, and shared laughter. As the celebration wound down, Forrest drove her home in a borrowed buggy, the desert night cool and clear around them. "I haven't enjoyed myself this much in years," he admitted as they traveled beneath the star-scattered sky. "Nor have I," Adelaide replied truthfully. After her father's death and the subsequent months of uncertainty, joy had been a distant memory. When they reached Mrs. Holbrook's house, Forrest helped her down from the buggy, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. In the silver moonlight, his face was half in shadow, but his eyes remained fixed on hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Good night, Adelaide," he said softly, releasing her and stepping back. "Good night, Forrest," she replied, inexplicably disappointed as he returned to the buggy without attempting to kiss her. The following weeks established a pattern. Forrest would visit the schoolhouse after classes ended, ostensibly checking on the town's newest institution, but increasingly bringing small gifts, wildflowers gathered from the desert, an interesting rock for her science lessons, or books borrowed from his personal collection. Sundays after church, he escorted her on walks through the more scenic areas around Terlingua, always proper and respectful, but with a growing tenderness that Adelaide found herself craving. As November turned to December, the desert nights grew colder, and Adelaide experienced her first Terlingua Christmas preparations. The town, despite its rough exterior, embraced the holiday with unexpected enthusiasm. Children rehearsed carols for a Christmas Eve performance. Women exchanged recipes for traditional holiday dishes, and men returned from hunting trips with game for the communal feast. "We need greenery for the schoolhouse," Adelaide declared one Saturday as she and Forrest walked along a dry creek bed. "I want to surprise the children on Monday with Christmas decorations." Forrest glanced at the sparse vegetation around them. "Not much grows green around here in December," he observed, "but there's a canyon about an hour's ride with junipers and piñon pines. I could take you tomorrow after church." The next day, they set out on horseback, Forrest leading the way into increasingly rugged terrain. Adelaide, who had learned to ride during her months in Texas, followed confidently, enjoying the freedom of movement and Forrest's appreciative glances at her improving horsemanship. The canyon revealed itself suddenly, a deep gash in the earth where water flowed seasonally, nurturing an unexpected oasis of vegetation. Twisted junipers and fragrant pines clung to the rocky slopes, their green needles bright against the red sandstone. "It's beautiful," Adelaide breathed, dismounting to better appreciate the view. "How did you find this place?" "Tracking cattle thieves 3 years back," Forrest replied, securing their horses. "Thought you might appreciate it. It's about the closest thing to a forest we've got within riding distance." They spent a pleasant hour gathering pine boughs and juniper branches, working side by side in companionable conversation. As they prepared to load their botanical treasures onto the horses, a distant rumble caught their attention. "Thunder?" Adelaide asked, glancing at the clear blue sky in confusion. Forrest's expression turned serious. "No, riders, coming fast." He quickly helped Adelaide onto her horse before mounting his own. "We should get back to the trail." They had just reached the canyon's entrance when 6 riders appeared, blocking their path. Adelaide felt Forrest stiffen beside her, his hand moving to rest near his holstered revolver. "Well now, if it ain't Marshal Winters," drawled the lead rider, a lanky man with a pockmarked face and cold eyes. "Out for a Sunday ride with the schoolmarm." Adelaide recognized him immediately. Calvin Mercer, father to one of her students and a man known for his volatile temper. Just last week, she'd sent his son home with a note regarding inappropriate language in the classroom. "Afternoon, Mercer," Forrest replied evenly. "We're headed back to town now." Mercer spat tobacco juice onto the ground. "Mighty cozy, the two of you out here alone." His gaze shifted to Adelaide, traveling over her figure with insulting deliberation. "Teaching more than reading and writing, Miss Taylor." Adelaide felt heat rise to her face, but before she could respond, Forrest moved his horse slightly forward, positioning himself between her and Mercer. "You're speaking to a lady, Mercer," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Apologize." The tension thickened as Mercer's companions shifted uneasily. After a long moment, Mercer forced a laugh. "No harm meant, Marshal, just making conversation." He tipped his hat mockingly toward Adelaide. "Beg pardon, Miss Taylor." Forrest remained impassive. "If you gentlemen will excuse us, we have town business to attend to." The riders parted reluctantly, allowing them passage. As they rode past, Adelaide could feel hostile eyes following them, but Forrest maintained a steady pace, neither hurrying nor dawdling. Once they were well beyond earshot, Adelaide released a shaky breath. "What was that about?" "Mercer's had a grudge since I arrested his brother last year," Forrest explained, his jaw tight. "He likes to push boundaries, see what he can get away with." "Will there be trouble?" Adelaide asked, glancing over her shoulder. Forrest's expression softened as he looked at her. "Not today." "Too many witnesses." The encounter cast a shadow over their afternoon, and Adelaide found herself watching Forrest more closely as they decorated the schoolhouse. His movements remained controlled and efficient, but she could sense a tension that hadn't been present before. "Forrest," she said finally, setting down the greenery she was arranging, "please tell me what's troubling you." He paused in his work, his back to her for a long moment before he turned. "I shouldn't have brought you out there alone," he said, regret evident in his voice. "It was irresponsible. I put your reputation at risk." Adelaide approached him slowly. "My reputation is my concern," she said firmly, "and I chose to go." "You don't understand how a place like Terlingua works," he countered. "A woman's standing is fragile. Rumors spread faster than wildfire." "And does my standing matter to you?" Adelaide asked quietly. Forrest met her gaze directly. "Everything about you matters to me." The simple declaration hung in the air between them, more powerful than any poetry or flowery declaration. Adelaide's heart thundered in her chest as she stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him. "Then trust me to know my own mind," she whispered. For a breathless moment, she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he gently tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "We should get you home before dark." The week before Christmas brought unexpected tragedy. A cave-in at the southern mine trapped 12 men, including Calvin Mercer. Forrest organized rescue efforts, working tirelessly alongside the miners to free those trapped. Adelaide closed the school and helped the women prepare food and bandages, waiting anxiously for news. After 36 grueling hours, they reached the trapped men. 8 survived, including Mercer, though he suffered a crushed leg that the doctor feared might require amputation. 4 bodies were recovered, including that of 14-year-old Miguel Sanchez, who had lied about his age to work the mines and help support his family. The town's Christmas celebrations continued, but with a somber undertone. Adelaide led her students in the planned carol performance on Christmas Eve, adding a special dedication to those lost and a prayer of thanksgiving for those saved. She noticed Forrest standing at the back of the gathering, his clothes still bearing traces of mine dust, his eyes hollow from exhaustion and grief. Later, as the townspeople dispersed to their homes, Adelaide found him alone on the steps of the small church, staring into the distance. "You should be resting," she said softly, settling beside him on the cold stone. "I keep seeing that boy's face," Forrest replied, his voice rough with fatigue. "Miguel. He was in your class, wasn't he?" Adelaide nodded, her throat tight. "He was bright, eager to learn English." "I pulled him out myself," Forrest continued, as if needing to speak the horror aloud. "His mother, the sound she made when she saw him." He broke off, covering his face with his hands. Without hesitation, Adelaide wrapped her arms around his shoulders, drawing him against her. For a moment he resisted, then yielded, allowing her to hold him as silent shudders passed through his body. "You did everything possible," she murmured against his hair. "Everyone says you worked without rest, that you saved those who could be saved." "It wasn't enough," he whispered. "It never feels enough," she agreed, thinking of her father's drawn-out death, how helpless she had felt watching him fade. "But you were there. You didn't turn away. That matters." They sat together in the cold night, finding comfort in shared sorrow and mutual understanding. When Forrest finally walked her home, something fundamental had shifted between them, a barrier crossed, a deeper trust established through shared grief. On Christmas morning, Adelaide awoke to find a small package waiting for her at the breakfast table. Mrs. Holbrook smiled mysteriously when questioned about its appearance. "A certain Marshal might have stopped by at dawn," was all she would say. Inside the package, Adelaide found a delicate silver pendant in the shape of a book, small enough to be elegant rather than ostentatious. A note in Forrest's precise handwriting read simply, "For the woman who brings light through knowledge, with deepest affection, F.W." She wore it to church that morning, and the pleased surprise in Forrest's eyes when he noticed it adorning her neck was worth more than any verbal thanks. January brought cold winds and occasional icy rain to Terlingua. School attendance became erratic as ranch children struggled with impassable roads, and the mine operated at reduced capacity due to frozen equipment. Adelaide used the quieter days to work individually with students who needed extra attention, particularly the Sanchez children, who returned to school grieving but determined to honor their brother's memory through education. Forrest continued his daily visits, often bringing firewood for the schoolhouse stove or repairing small damages from the harsh weather. Their relationship deepened through these shared tasks and quiet conversations, though neither explicitly defined what was growing between them. One bitter February afternoon, as Adelaide dismissed her handful of students early due to an approaching storm, Forrest arrived looking unusually grim. "What is it?" she asked once the last child had departed. "Mercer broke out of the infirmary last night," he explained, checking that the schoolhouse windows were securely latched. "Stole a horse and supplies. I've been tracking him all day." Adelaide felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "Is he dangerous?" "He's wounded, desperate, and blames everyone else for his troubles," Forrest replied. "That makes him unpredictable." He helped her into her heavy coat. "I'm escorting you home, and I want you to stay there until I send word it's safe." As they stepped outside, fat snowflakes began falling from the leaden sky, a rare occurrence in this part of Texas. By the time they reached Mrs. Holbrook's house, the storm had intensified, the wind driving the snow horizontally. "You can't go back out in this," Adelaide protested as Forrest prepared to leave. "Wait until it passes." He shook his head. "Mercer has a 12-hour head start already. This weather will cover his tracks completely if I don't pick up his trail now." Adelaide caught his arm. "Please," she said earnestly. "One night won't make a difference if the trail is already cold. Your horse is exhausted, and you'll do no one any good if you freeze to death." Mrs. Holbrook appeared in the hallway. "The girl's right, Marshal. My Henry always said only fools and greenhorns travel in a Texas blue norther. Stay for supper at least, until the worst passes." Forrest hesitated, glancing from the snow-obscured window to Adelaide's worried face. "1 hour," he conceded finally. "If it doesn't let up by then, I'll have to go anyway." An hour became 2 as the storm intensified into a full blizzard. Mrs. Holbrook served a hearty stew, regaling them with stories of previous Terlingua winters to distract from the howling wind. By the time they finished their meal, even Forrest had to admit that pursuing Mercer would be futile and likely fatal in such conditions. "You'll take Henry's old room upstairs," Mrs. Holbrook announced, brooking no argument. "Can't have Terlingua's only lawman perishing on my watch." Adelaide felt a flutter of impropriety at the thought of Forrest sleeping under the same roof, but the storm made the arrangement unavoidable. As Mrs. Holbrook busied herself preparing the guest room, Adelaide found herself alone with Forrest in the parlor, the dancing flames of the fireplace casting warm light across his features. "Thank you for staying," she said quietly. "I would have worried terribly." Forrest's expression softened. "Seems I'm developing a weakness for your concerns," he admitted. "Not ideal for a man in my position." "And what position is that?" Adelaide asked, emboldened by the intimacy of the moment. "A man who's supposed to put duty first," he replied, his gaze holding hers. "A man who can't offer the security a woman like you deserves." Adelaide moved closer, her heart pounding. "Perhaps you should let me decide what I deserve." The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken words and suppressed emotions. Forrest lifted his hand to her face, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek with exquisite gentleness. "Adelaide," he began, his voice husky. "Room's ready," Mrs. Holbrook announced, bustling back into the parlor. "Goodness, but that wind sounds like a banshee. We might be snowbound for days." The moment broken, Forrest stepped back, clearing his throat. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mrs. Holbrook." Later, lying in her bed listening to the storm rage outside, Adelaide replayed those interrupted moments in the parlor. What might Forrest have said if they hadn't been interrupted? What might have happened? The questions followed her into restless dreams. The storm lasted 2 days, dropping unprecedented snow across the desert landscape. When it finally cleared, Forrest departed at dawn to resume his search for Mercer, leaving Adelaide with an unresolved tension and a growing certainty about her feelings. School resumed as the snow melted, but Forrest's visits became irregular as he devoted himself to tracking the fugitive. Adelaide missed his steady presence and found herself watching the schoolhouse door each afternoon, hoping to see his tall figure appear. A week after the storm, she returned to her room at Mrs. Holbrook's house to find a note slipped beneath her door. Forrest's handwriting, usually so precise, appeared hurried. Found Mercer's trail heading toward Mexico. Will be gone several days. Stay vigilant. F.W. Adelaide pressed the paper to her heart, troubled by its brevity and the absence of any personal sentiment. The following days dragged with agonizing slowness, as she divided her time between teaching and anxiously scanning the horizon for signs of Forrest's return. On the 10th day of his absence, a stranger rode into Terlingua, a Texas ranger named Cooper who brought news that chilled Adelaide's blood. Forrest had tracked Mercer to a remote canyon near the Rio Grande, where they'd exchanged gunfire. Both men had been wounded, with Mercer escaping across the river. Forrest had been taken to a doctor in Presidio, his condition serious but stable. "I'll take you to him," Cooper offered when he saw Adelaide's distress. "Marshal Winters has been asking for you." Mrs. Holbrook hastily packed supplies while Adelaide arranged for a substitute teacher. By noon, they were on the trail to Presidio, Cooper leading the way with quiet efficiency. The journey took a full day, with Adelaide growing more anxious with each passing mile. They reached Presidio as the sun set, the border town lively with commerce and travelers despite the late hour. Cooper led her to a small adobe building that served as the doctor's residence and clinic. Inside, the air smelled of medicinal herbs and antiseptic. "He's through here," the doctor said, leading Adelaide to a back room. "Lost blood from the shoulder wound, but he's tough. Fever broke yesterday." Forrest lay on a narrow bed, his normally tanned face pale against the white pillowcase. His left shoulder was heavily bandaged and his breathing seemed shallow. Adelaide moved to his side, taking his hand gently in hers. "Forrest," she whispered, "I'm here." His eyelids fluttered open, confusion giving way to recognition. "Adelaide," he murmured, his voice weak. "You shouldn't have come. It's not safe." "As if I could stay away," she replied, blinking back tears of relief. "You frightened me half to death." A ghost of his familiar smile touched his lips. "Takes more than Mercer's poor aim to finish me." He tried to sit up but winced in pain. "Lie still," Adelaide ordered, placing a restraining hand on his uninjured shoulder. "The doctor says you need rest." Forrest settled back reluctantly. "Mercer got away," he said, frustration evident in his voice. "Crossed into Mexico before I could catch him." "He can stay there," Adelaide replied firmly. "You're not going after him again until you're fully recovered." To her surprise, Forrest didn't argue. Instead, his fingers tightened around hers. "I thought of you," he admitted quietly, "when I was lying out there thinking I might not make it back. I thought of all the things I hadn't said to you." Adelaide's heart quickened. "Such as?" Forrest's gaze held hers with fierce intensity. "That I love you, that I've loved you since you stood in that unfinished schoolhouse and saw possibility instead of disappointment. That every day since you arrived in Terlingua has been brighter for your presence in it." Tears spilled down Adelaide's cheeks as joy bloomed in her chest. "I love you too," she whispered, leaning forward to press her forehead against his. "So much that it terrifies me." His hand came up to cradle the back of her neck, and when their lips finally met, it felt like coming home after a long journey. The kiss was gentle, mindful of his injuries, but filled with the promise of deeper passions to come. "Marry me," Forrest murmured against her lips. Not someday, not when circumstances are perfect. Now, while we have the chance. Adelaide drew back slightly, searching his face. Are you certain? More certain than I've ever been of anything, he replied. Life out here is unpredictable, Adelaide. I don't want to waste another day pretending we're just friends, or that I could ever be content with less than having you as my wife. Joy and love overwhelmed her, washing away months of uncertainty and restraint. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I will marry you, Forrest Winters. His smile transformed his face, erasing lines of pain and weariness. From the pocket of his trousers, folded neatly beside the bed, he retrieved a small object. I've been carrying this since Christmas, he confessed, opening his palm to reveal a simple gold band set with a small pearl. It was my mother's. I had it with me when I went after Mercer, thinking I might find the courage to ask you when I returned. Adelaide extended her trembling left hand, watching as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if meant for her all along. The doctor says I can travel in 2 days, Forrest continued, his thumb caressing the ring now adorning her hand. We could be married here, or wait until we return to Terlingua. Here, Adelaide decided without hesitation. I don't want to wait any longer than necessary. 2 days later, in the simple Presidio church, Adelaide Taylor became Adelaide Winters. She wore her best blue dress, adorned with wildflowers gathered by the doctor's wife. Forrest stood tall despite his bandaged shoulder, his eyes never leaving hers as they spoke their vows before the aging priest and a handful of witnesses, including Ranger Cooper and Mrs. Holbrook, who had insisted on traveling with Adelaide. I promise to protect you, to respect you, and to love you all the days of my life, Forrest vowed, his voice steady and clear. To be your partner in all things, to honor your strength and independence even as I offer my support. Adelaide blinked back joyful tears. I promise to stand by your side through whatever challenges come our way, she replied. To create a home filled with love, to respect your duties while reminding you that you are more than your badge, and to love you completely today and always. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Forrest drew her close with his good arm, kissing her with a tenderness that belied the strength of his feelings. As they parted, he took her left hand in his thumb caressing the gold band that now signified their union. The day you arrived in Terlingua, he murmured for her ears alone, I told myself a woman like you wouldn't stay long in our dusty corner of nowhere. I've never been so grateful to be wrong. The return journey to Terlingua took 3 days, with frequent stops to allow Forrest to rest. Adelaide discovered new aspects of her husband during this time: his dry humor when tired, his preference for dawn over dusk, the way he unconsciously hummed old hymns when lost in thought. Each revelation was a treasure to store away, a piece of the complex man she had married. They arrived home to discover the town had organized an impromptu celebration upon hearing of their marriage. The schoolhouse had been transformed with garlands and ribbons, tables laden with food contributed by every family. Speech. Someone called as Forrest and Adelaide entered the festive scene, still dusty from the road. Forrest, never comfortable as the center of attention, nevertheless drew Adelaide to his side and addressed the gathered townspeople. I came to Terlingua 4 years ago thinking I'd stay a year at most, he began. This place had nothing but dust and hard work to offer. Then the town council decided we needed a school, and the most remarkable woman in Texas answered that advertisement. He looked down at Adelaide, his expression softening. Suddenly, Terlingua had everything I could ever want. Cheers erupted, and the celebration continued well into the night. Mrs. Holbrook had prepared the Marshal's house for their return. adding feminine touches to the Spartan bachelor quarters, curtains at the windows, quilts on the bed, and a wedding gift of fine china plates. "It's not much," Forrest said apologetically as he showed Adelaide around what was now their home. "I never bothered with more than the necessities." Adelaide turned a slow circle in the main room, already envisioning the changes that would transform the house into a home. "It's perfect," she assured him. "We'll make it ours together." That night, as they lay together in the intimacy of marriage, Adelaide discovered yet another side of Forrest, the passionate lover, whose tenderness matched his strength, who whispered words of adoration against her skin as they learned each other's bodies. Afterward, cradled in his arms, she felt a completeness she had never imagined possible. "I thought coming west was a last resort," she confessed in the darkness. "I was desperate with nowhere else to go after Father died. Now I see it was leading me exactly where I belonged all along." Forrest pressed a kiss to her temple. "Providence has strange ways," he agreed. "All those years at war, then drifting from town to town, I was looking for something without knowing what it was." His fingers traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "It was you, Adelaide. It was always going to be you." Spring brought new beginnings to Terlingua. The schoolhouse garden that Adelaide planted blossomed with native wildflowers and herbs. Forrest's shoulder healed completely, though it pained him when rain approached, a weather predictor more reliable than almanacs, he joked. Together, they established routines that honored both their individual duties and their shared life. News came that Calvin Mercer had been killed in a cantina brawl across the border, bringing closure to that chapter of uncertainty. Forrest received an offer to become county sheriff, a position of greater prestige and better pay, but after discussing it with Adelaide, declined in favor of remaining Terlingua's marshal. "This is our home now," he explained when the county commissioner expressed surprise at his decision. "My wife's work with the school is just beginning to bear fruit, and I've made commitments to this community." Summer arrived with scorching heat and the end of Adelaide's first full school year. As her students scattered to ranches and mining camps for the break, she found herself experiencing unexpected fatigue and morning sickness. "I believe congratulations are in order," the doctor confirmed after examining her. "You'll be welcoming a new Winters come winter." Adelaide shared the news with Forrest that evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the desert in fiery hues. His reaction stunned silence, followed by a whoop of joy that startled the neighbor's chickens, remained one of her favorite memories. "A child," he marveled, kneeling before her and resting his head against her still flat stomach. "Our child." Adelaide ran her fingers through his hair, overwhelmed by love for this man who had transformed her life. "Are you pleased?" He looked up, his eyes suspiciously bright. "More than pleased," he assured her. "Terrified, amazed, grateful, but mostly just incredibly happy." As her pregnancy progressed, Adelaide continued teaching, though she delegated more physical tasks to her older students. Forrest became almost comically protective, checking on her between his rounds and enlisting half the town to watch over her in his absence. "I'm pregnant, not made of porcelain," she reminded him with fond exasperation when he insisted on carrying her books the short distance from school to home. "Humor me," he replied, kissing her forehead. "I've never had so much to lose before." Their son, Henry Thomas Winters, arrived during a December snowstorm that rivaled the one that had stranded Forrest at Mrs. Holbrook's house 2 years earlier. The birth was difficult, with the doctor fighting through the blizzard to reach them and Forrest pacing anxiously as Adelaide labored through the night. When it was over, Forrest sat beside their bed, their tiny son cradled against his chest, watching Adelaide with an expression of such profound love and gratitude that it brought tears to her eyes. "He has your eyes," Forrest observed, studying the newborn's face with wonder. "And your stubborn chin," Adelaide replied tiredly. "Poor child." Forrest laughed softly, then grew serious. "You are the bravest person I know," he told her. "What you just went through, I've never felt so helpless, so in awe." Adelaide reached out to touch their son's perfect hand. "Worth every moment," she assured him. "Though perhaps we might wait a while before giving him a sibling." The years that followed brought changes to Terlingua and to the Winters family. The school expanded as the town grew, eventually requiring a second teacher whom Adelaide personally selected and mentored. Forrest's reputation for fair-minded justice spread throughout the county, bringing both respect and occasional danger. They weathered difficult times, drought years when crops failed, a scarlet fever outbreak that claimed several children, though Henry was mercifully spared, and the constant challenges of frontier life. Their daughter, Elizabeth Rose, joined the family 4 years after Henry, her arrival easier than her brother's but no less celebrated. Forrest proved an attentive father to both children, teaching Henry to ride and track while reading endless stories to Elizabeth, who inherited her mother's love of books. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Forrest surprised Adelaide with a trip to San Antonio, their first real vacation since marrying. They left the children with Mrs. Holbrook, who had become a beloved grandmother figure to them, and spent a glorious week exploring the growing city, attending theatrical performances, and enjoying the luxury of uninterrupted time together. On their final evening in San Antonio, after a dinner more elegant than anything available in Terlingua, Forrest presented Adelaide with a velvet box containing a new ring, a diamond flanked by small sapphires. "To go with your wedding band," he explained, as she admired it in the candlelight. "I promised you I'd never let go of you again after that first day in Presidio, when I placed my mother's ring on your finger with shaking hands. This is to remind you that my feelings have only grown stronger with each passing year." Adelaide felt tears well in her eyes as she extended her hand, allowing him to slide the new ring alongside the simple gold band she had never removed. "When I arrived in Terlingua 15 years ago," she said softly, "I thought I was settling for less than I deserved. I could never have imagined the richness of the life we would build together." Forrest took her hand, kissing first her palm, then the inside of her wrist where her pulse fluttered. "I plan to keep surprising you for at least another 50 years, he promised. "Think you can tolerate me for that long?" Adelaide smiled, the lines at the corners of her eyes deepening, lines earned through years of laughter and Texas sun. "I believe that might just be enough time to truly know your heart, Forrest Winters." "You've known it since that first day," he countered, drawing her to him. "It's always been yours to claim." They returned to Terlingua renewed, recommitting themselves to the community that had brought them together and to the family they had created. As the years passed, they witnessed the transformation of the Wild West into something more settled, railroads connecting once isolated communities, telegraphs bringing news from across the nation, and eventually, the first automobile chugging down Terlingua's Main Street, frightening horses and fascinating children. Henry grew into a thoughtful young man who combined his father's sense of justice with his mother's love of learning. He left for college in Austin at 18, returning with a law degree and eventually establishing a practice in the county seat. Elizabeth, spirited and independent, surprised them by becoming a nurse after witnessing the doctor's work during a mine accident. She married a kind-hearted rancher whose property bordered Terlingua, giving Forrest and Adelaide the joy of grandchildren close enough to spoil regularly. Through it all, The foundation remained the love between a schoolteacher who had journeyed west with little more than hope, and the marshal who had taken her ring with shaking hands, vowing never to let go again. Their story became part of Terlingua's lore, how Adelaide Taylor's arrival had transformed not only the town's educational prospects, but also the heart of its most respected lawmen. In their twilight years, they could often be found on the porch of the home they had shared for decades, watching the desert sunset paint the landscape in gold and crimson. Adelaide's once golden hair had turned silver, and Forrest moved more slowly, his tall frame slightly stooped, but their hands remained intertwined, the gold band and its diamond companion gleaming in the fading light, tangible symbols of a love that had flourished in the unlikeliest of places, bringing forth a legacy of strength, compassion, and unwavering devotion that would endure long after the frontier days faded into history.